Back again today with another installment of our Industry Insiders. Today, a very exciting interview. I have the owner of MyMMANews, Eric Kowal, with us today. Eric, how are you doing?
Doing awesome. How are you, Bearcat?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for coming on. I'm excited to talk to you. Just talking a little bit beforehand, just kind of get your story about, why regional MMA and how that started. But wanted to start first, just, asking you what drew you to MMA in the first place. Is there, a fight or an athlete or someone who kind of drew you in early on?
Yeah, so like most people, I'm not going to say I watched UFC 1 live, like, a lot of people say they do. Only a couple thousand people watched it live, but I was one of the guys that, in high school, would watch the VHS tapes with my friends. Tito Ortiz was big at the time. And that kind of like got me into it, like the late, I'd say like 96, 97 is when I started watching the VHS tapes. They would come out, and then eventually the pay-per-views, we'd get parties together for Pride and things like that. And then when I joined the Marine Corps martial arts, there was the Marine Corps martial arts program. And so I started getting into it a lot more. Then when I would come home, I was stationed in 29 Palms, California. When I would come home, I would train jujitsu at a facility in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, and it just kept on steamrolling from there. I started getting into it, and it was, the Sure Dog was big back then, and I would get on the forums and start writing, and people would say, hey, you seem like you're knowledgeable in the sport, why don't you come write for me, this and that. So I started writing for a couple websites, and US Combat Sports was one of them. And then also Ultimate MMA Magazine, which was a magazine that, before they went the way of the dinosaur and kind of disappeared, I was writing for them, and that was kind of cool because I got to do features on like, guys that fought in the early days in the UFC. And then, US Combat Sports, I really like them because the focus was they had the website set up so that it was like different writers for different regions. So I controlled like the Northeast. So I was one of like a few writers from this area. So I'd go cover events, and it was really cool. Like it was before like the commissions really got heavily involved in it. Before it was sanctioned in a lot of states, like New York definitely wasn't sanctioned. There was a lot of Indian reservation type events, and that's really, how I got into it. And then, one day I was flying home from Las Vegas, and the Ultimate MMA magazine was kind of going away. People weren't buying magazines anymore. They had told us, hey, this is going to be our last issue. And US Combat Sports, the owner, he realized, hey, like it's a lot of money. Like it takes a lot of time and effort if you really want to make money in MMA news, and then with all the competition, all the big sites that cover like the UFC and can travel to all the events, small little regional MMA sites are really hard to make profitable. They had the right idea. It was just the owner at the time didn't want to invest a lot of money in it. So he ended up selling the site. So I sat, sitting on the plane, and I was like, all my content's going to go away. What am I going to do? Where am I going to start all over? And my wife was like, why don't you start a site? And I looked at her like, are you crazy? Like, how hard that is? You can't just compete with MMA Junkie or MMA Fighting. It's really, and I'm not saying that we're competition now, but it's really difficult. And as I said previously, to make money and then pay your writers, it's difficult. It's very hard, especially now in a time like with COVID where events aren't going on. Like really, for only a couple months there, the only game in town was the UFC. So we're taking a lot of and a lot of sites kind of disappear out of the field. So that's kind of where I was at with it, how I started, how I got to where I am today.
Now, you said about going into the Marine Corps, right? And you were writing on the Sure Dog forums, which I think a lot of us early on were kind of weighing in and giving our
Yeah.
opinions on there. Now, did you have any kind of journalism background? Did you have any kind of website coding background? How did you figure these things?
No, no. So, I'm not going to say I had like a glorious job in the Marine Corps. I did kind of like office work, did like administrative stuff. So, I had an experience. I went to what they call a defense information school for writing, for journalism. And so, I mean, I did have a little bit of information on how to do it in that regard. But writing about mixed martial arts, no. I mean, and you know, there really weren't a whole lot of sites out there. I mean, even when you think about Sherdog back then, people knew about it just for like the forum. So it wasn't really like, I mean, yeah, there was news content coming out of Sherdog, but like it was mostly people would go there for the forum to interact with fans and kind of talk. So, I mean, as far as like the writing aspect, it was kind of just like, you know, go with the flow. Forum, you know, you could write in lowercase and LOL and all these different things. And but no, I mean, to really just start a site, like I said, when, you know, when I told my wife, I said, like, she was like, start a site. I said, yeah, right. You know how hard that is, you know. But I knew, you know, I knew about writing with like the AP style guide and things like that. As far as starting a website, I had no clue. I mean, I had done some of the coding for US Combat Sports, but nothing like, you know, actually creating the site from scratch. So I did have a little help there. I mean, I had to pay some people to kind of get it going. I know, and like the first year, I mean, like I said, it's not easy to start. Like you can't just be a force overnight with, you know, with people saying, hey, let me go to your site for news. You kind of have to trust you. Google has to trust you. It takes time to build it up, you know, for your search engines to pick you up and things like that. So it was difficult at first. I'm not going to lie. And there were definitely times where I was like, you know what, this isn't worth it. And it's too hard to do. But then things like, you know, I'd go to events and people would start recognizing me, and fighters would want to interviews. I'd walk by fighters. I remember I'd go to like shows, and you know, I knew who they were because I would watch them in the cage, and they would come up to me and be like, hey, you know, can you interview me? And I'm like, you know, okay, sure, you know. And then you know, I had no clue what to do. I didn't really know much about, you know, the interview process or anything like that, but just kind of learned. And you know, watching guys do it over the years, and it just kind of snowballed, and it's been successful. I mean, we've this is almost our sixth year now. Yeah, sixth year now. I started in 2014. I've got about 30 writers now. I've taken kind of like a step back where I'm just like the editor, you know, pushing the content out, let them write, let them do the interviews. We have about, like I said, we have about 30 writers. I'd say 10 of them are like almost, I wouldn't say full time, but like they spend a lot of time doing interviews, you know, pushing out content 2 to 3 pieces a day. So a lot of the other ones are just kind of like behind the scenes, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces a month. But it's been working, so I can't complain.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely has. And I mean, I wanted to also kind of ask you and find out, do you think that your, you know, your martial arts training and some of that writing that you did early on aided in your ability to not just write about MMA, but also interact with MMA fighters, because they are kind of a different breed and they are a different interview than, say, like an NBA player or somebody that just got off of, you know, a tennis match or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult, and it still happens to this day. I mean, it even happened to me today. I'm not gonna, you know, it wasn't anything negative, and I'm not gonna throw the fighter under the bus. But you know, he put an article up. Basically, you know, an organization puts out like a press release, and then you kind of create an article from that. Like they're gonna break, you know, their news guy, their media guy will put something out and say, hey, we're holding this card. Here's information about it. Then you kind of formulate an article from that. And the way that the promotion put it out was, you know, talking about the fighters last time with them. So he had gone and fought for other promotions since then, but they didn't mention that. So they said that, you know, his last fight was a loss with them. And the fighter kind of messaged me and was like, hey, you know, this is wrong. And I tried to explain to him like, hey, that's not really what it says. It says the last time you fought for them was a loss, you know. But and it's weird, like another athlete wouldn't do that. Like a baseball player is not going to say like, you know, message you and say like, hey, you know, I had 517 home runs, not, you know, 511. It's just like it's things like that. Like MMA fighters, like you said, are a different breed. You know, it's when you're talking about egos, you know, and everybody wants to show that like they're the alpha male. So it is interesting. I've had some unique experiences in interviews. Some were great, some not so great. But yeah, I mean, you definitely learn how to approach different thing, different aspects of talking with fighters. Um, if you're gonna if you're gonna interview somebody about jujitsu, you want to know what some of the terminology. You want to know what a calf slicer is, or a rear naked choke, or you know um, in other sports you can kind of get by with that stuff without really knowing. I mean, you can write in generalities, but MMA is totally different. It's very different.
Yeah, and I think a big thing that aids in your viewership is the articles that get put out on your website. People who read them that know anything about the sport know that your authors do know what they're talking about. Because I think, like you said, in MMA more than any other sport, you can really tell when someone's just kind of coasting by and doesn't know what they're saying. So when you're looking for authors and people to work at MyMMANews, is a prior experience or at least like a strong knowledge of the sport almost a requirement at this point?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We do have a few freelancers, and we have over the years. I mean, I've had some of the biggest names like Damon Martin, who writes for the UFC. He writes for MMA Fighting now. He's been with me. I have Hunter Homostek, who was from Flow Combat. Mike Heck was with us up until this year, and he just went to MMA Fighting. I mean, he basically started his career with us, and now he has a full-time career where he's getting paid a salary. So we do have a lot of guys that like have some experience, at least in training too. I mean, like Adam Chris, he used to do kickboxing. Bob Maloney,
Mhm.
he's been doing ring announcing for a lot of the local promotions for years. So I would say a good majority of our writers at least have some knowledge, either in training or competition, or just being in the field, matchmaking, something. But then others, I mean, don't have any of that, but they do have writing experience or interview experience. So yeah, definitely I do screen who works with us.
Okay. And you said something interesting there about a couple journalists who kind of started with you and they've moved on to now have their full-time gig with other organizations. And it kind of is very akin to what you cover, which is, I think, at your heart is regional MMA. And the regional fighters are also fighting for these promotions with the hopes of going to your PFLs, your
Mhm.
Bellators, your UFCs. So in a world where you could have just picked up and said, all right, I'm going to cover Bellator and UFC, Invicta, things like that. Why start with regional? I mean, I got interviewed after I think it was a WCC show where I won a belt, and Adam Chris
Yeah,
interviewed me afterwards. I was like, this is awesome. Like, these guys interview like
yeah,
UFC fighters and they're standing talking to me.
yeah. So it's funny you bring that up. I was actually at your first MMA fight, XFV,
Mhm.
uh, before the WCC fights, so I knew who you were. So I just really liked the regional MMA because you can write about a Conor McGregor or a John Jones, Daniel Cormier, but they're not likely to share your article. So many people are writing about them. Um, their mom, their brother and sister is not going to share the article. When you write about a regional fighter or you interview them, you get like the shares are phenomenal. I mean, you get everybody and their family member. It's kind of like when you have a kid and they get an A in school and you hang it up on the refrigerator. Everybody's showing their friends and family, and it just kind of it goes from there. So, and the stories are just so unique. Like there are, don't get me wrong, there are the occasion where you'll interview a UFC or Bellator fighter and you get a story that nobody's had. Um, but them telling their start, their background, that story has probably been told 20 times already because they probably already have 15, 20 professional fights. Um, Whereas if I interviewed you, you know, on the regional scene, like you said, nobody really ever interviewed you before.
Mhm.
So you're likely gonna tell us your start, and then when you do make it to the PFL, Bellator, UFC, there's that connection, and we get that all the time. I mean, there's been so many fighters that have gone on to the bigger leagues, and they'll tell us, oh, hey, you interviewed me when nobody did, or you know, you've been telling our story, so I'm gonna, or you've been talking about our gym, covering our gym, our fighters, so I'm gonna give you the scoop. So it's kind of like it's like a trade-off process almost. Like you build the relationships with the fighters, the managers, the coaches, the people in the gyms, and it works out. I mean, that's just why I covered it. I like the regional aspect of it. We do cover all the other stuff, just because you have to. I mean, if, like I said, if you want to pay the bills, if you want to pay your writers, um, and you want to stay up there with, having a high ranking in Google and stuff like that, you've got to cover that other part of the sport, just because you've got to stay competitive. And um, it's I don't want to say it's mandatory, but it's really, like I said earlier, it's just really hard to drive or thrive just on regional MMA, especially now in a time of COVID, when there's really nothing going on. I mean, the last regional show I went to was probably February,
Mhm.
February or March. So I mean, if I didn't cover the other stuff, I'd be out of business right now.
Yeah,
Which
and I
is, I mean,
mean,
it's just.
even with like the CFFCs that are, I'd still consider them regional shows, high level
Mhm.
regional. There's no fans there. I don't know if they're having journalists in the building or if you kind of just have to cover it from watching Fight Pass, but it's a whole new world of even journalism at this point.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the things that I learned over the years. Like there are companies that will pay to send their writers or photographers or their staff members to different events. Like you see that all the time. You see John Morgan at every UFC event. I mean, he's the guy with the blue shirt. He's there. He's asking the first question. But the return on investment, if I flew to Vegas every time they had a fight and stayed in a hotel for 3 or 4 days, especially now with COVID, you have to be there 3 or 4 days in advance because you have to get tested for COVID. So you're talking over $1,000 a trip just to cover it. And that's just one person, flight, hotel, meals. Um, so if you flew a whole team there, you're talking thousands of dollars in expenses. Um, so like you said, you can cover it mostly from home now. I mean, if you're just really trying to do like the quick results. As far as interviews and stuff, it's so much easier now. Um, and it's kind of weird. It's different times, but like, you can do Zoom, you can do Skype. A lot of Bellator does that a lot now, where after the fighters win, they go to the back, and rather than having the scrum with Scott Coker and everybody else, they're setting up Zoom meetings, and we're doing that all the time. So really, there's hasn't really been much difference as far as in covering it. It's just you don't need to be there. As far as the promotions, like you mentioned, CFFC, and there are other promotions on Fight Pass. It's really up to the promotion if they want to invite media in. They can. I know, like I work also with Titan FC. That's one of my other positions aside from MyMMANews. I do their public relations, so I bring in all the media for them, set up their interviews, things like that. So any fighters, I mean any media that want to attend those events, they go through me. But yeah, again, they just they have to get tested for COVID, so they have to be there for weigh-ins and for the event. So I mean, times are changing, times are evolving, but as far as really what you can do just because you're not on the ground, it's kind of all the same.
And I guess the biggest hit would really be that, you're, like we talked about earlier, you are at a lot of those regional shows and are telling the stories of those regional fighters. I was talking to Christian Carr at the gym the other day. I was like, are you planning on fighting anytime soon? What's your plan? And he pretty much said, amateurs can't fight anywhere. So, I'm just staying in shape. And when there's amateur cards again, I guess I'll go. But, there's a lot of amateurs who, like him, were kind of on the cusp of maybe I'll go pro, maybe one more, two more.
Mhm.
Um, how do you think that's going to, affect those fighters in the long term? Those guys that might have been right on the cusp.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. It's one that I really don't have the answer for. If you take a look at the UFC, they've been a lot of a lot of regional guys
Hmm.
have gone to the UFC. Some of them might have records that you didn't really consider as ones that would be accepted earlier on. Like most times when you think about people going to the UFC, they've got 15 pro fights ish, something like that. Now you're seeing guys 6-0, 5-0, 5-1 get the call. That didn't happen years ago. I mean, yes, there were the every one and again type fighters. You had like the James Toney or the CM Punks and things
Sure.
like that. 0-0. But I mean, those guys originally had draws. Everybody else, you had to have 10 fights or something like that. And there are the regional shows, like you said, the bigger ones, like the CFFCs, the Titan FCs, the Invicta FC, all those ones that are somewhat affiliated with Fight Pass, or even like a Bellator, they're putting on shows. And there's a lot of like the top talent. And like you said, some of the guys, they've got 5-6 pro fights. They're fighting, and then they're getting called to the UFC. But everybody else underneath that, there's really not much going on. Like you said, the amateurs aren't competing. And you might have, guys 1-0, competing on these regional shows, 1-0, 1-1, whatever, but they're not going to yet get the UFC call. So they got to keep fighting. But eventually unless we get back to fights, regional fights, especially the amateur fights, there's going to be a point where it just gets cut off. I mean, like you said, unless the guys keep training, how are they gonna stay in shape? How are they gonna stay fight ready? And then in a lot of the areas, the gyms are just now opening up. New Jersey being one. They weren't allowed to open up and train, or at least properly. So it's a very difficult situation for everybody involved. As far as like the amateurs, I think you're going to start realizing, or you're going to start seeing some fighters that are going to say, well, okay, I haven't had a fight. I'm not making any money off of this. Maybe I'll keep training. Or even some pros, they might say, I'm done. I'm not getting anywhere with this. I've got to feed my family. I've got to do a career. I think you're going to see a lot of people back out of the sport. And you might even see that with promotions. Some of the regional promotions might, kind of just go away. I mean, I don't want to speak for promotions, but before this all started, PA Cage Fight kind of announced that they were done. Like Paul Matriselva and Chris Coyne, they're no longer doing shows. I mean, Chris is doing the boxing shows, but as far as the MMA aspect of it, I think they're done. Art of War, I'm sure, will come back. But right now, like you said, unless they can sell tickets, butts in seats and sell tickets, there's no way for them to make money. So is the juice worth the squeeze? In this area, is Maverick MMA going to come back? I don't know. It's just there's no point for the promoter to try to put on a show, and then they have to do a TV deal. They've got to try to sell or at least an internet broadcast deal. They've got to try to sell the show. So you've got to market that, and you're not getting any money on tickets. So it's hard. How do you pay your pros? I don't know. It's a situation that each promoter is going to have to figure out on their own.
Yeah, and it becomes almost like a different business model in a sense, because instead of having your fighters hustle tickets to kind of pay for your pros, and then they're bringing in X amount of dollars for you or whatever that may be, it's almost like the regional promoters would have to get into the TV ad space business, and they'd have to start selling ads on regional streams, which I don't know if that's a very sound business model or not. I mean, regional MMA is a volatile business in and of itself, where you could lose your ass in one show and not ever come back. So
yeah, exactly.
Me personally, I don't know. I don't think I would fight in a arena that's not full of fans unless it's on like a Fight Pass, just because there's so many unknowns going into it. And I just really enjoy fighting in front of a crowd and in front of my friends and family, everybody that comes out to see it. Now everybody kind of feels different about it. There's some guys who are like, yeah, if it can improve my record, I'll fight him at the gym tomorrow. And there's kind of just, everybody in between. With that being said, where do you kind of see the sport going as a whole? Because I mean, the UFC clearly isn't going anywhere. They have the ESPN deal, was it $4 billion or something they were acquired for, a stupid amount of money. So they sank a lot of money into the UFC to not go anywhere. But at some point, there's going to be a gap, right, where your regional amateurs are still not fighting. Your pros got to a certain level, or like you said, they call it quits. Do you have any like insider idea of what could happen or how they kind of bridge that gap?
I mean, it really depends too on, again, it's kind of like, a health question, but as far as like when things open up,
Sure.
and the states, the states that regulate it. I mean, Pennsylvania is open up for shows. Like you said, the CFFC did a show. It's just you've got to have the platform to put it forth. You've got to have the money to do it. Luckily for CFFC, they have the UFC Fight Pass deal. Um, so as far as like promotions, going forward, um, really don't know like what they're gonna do, um, with trying to put on these shows where they're not able to sell the tickets
Mhm.
to pay the fighters. And like you said, there are some fighters that'll put on a fight, for free just to stay in shape, or but not everybody's going to do that, and especially the guys that are on the cusp, as you mentioned before, the cusp of the UFC. Nobody's going to take that risk, or at least most won't, and their coaches and their managers sure as hell are going to tell them don't take that risk. So I mean, unless things really get figured out here before like the winter, I think you're going to see a lot of promotions and a lot of athletes kind of pull back from the sport. But like you said, I said it earlier too, um, unless things get going, there's going to be eventually a plateau where you can't have any more guys go to the UFC.
Mhm.
Or if they keep pulling guys, you're going to start seeing guys that are 1-0, 2-0 get called to the UFC. And is that a good or a bad thing? I don't know. I mean, yeah, sure, it's probably exciting for them. It'll be good for us as far as telling the story, that the news and the interviews. But are the fans going to get into it? Probably. But you're also going to get a lot of criticism too, because there's going to be guys who aren't as experienced fighting at the top level. So it's a tricky situation, and I think we just kind of have to see how it plays out. Last night, I don't know if you watched the Contender Series. Dana White said that they're going to be doing another season. Traditionally, they've done the seasons like around April, May timeframe. This year, they pushed it back for COVID, but he said they're going to be doing another season coming in November. So what does that mean? That means more fighters,
Mhm.
more regional guys. From at least from this area, you're going to see CFFC, Ring of Combat, some of these other promotions are going to be going there. I mean, Art of War just had Matt Semmelsberger. He fought for CFFC as well. But that was their first guy that ever went to the UFC.
Mhm.
So you're gonna see some of these fighters get plucked, but eventually there's going to be a plateau. I don't know when that will be.
Gotcha. And last thing before I let you go here, you said earlier, there's the MMA junkies and those kind of publications of the world, and you're quick to say, and we're not competition to them, but in my opinion, it would be not yet. Do you have a goal to kind of be up there with the top 3, 4, 5 promotion or publications? Is there, are you striving to be that number one hit when there's something in Google, or what's the goal moving forward for MMA News?
Yeah, so that's a question that I get asked all the time. So I have me personally, I have a full-time job.
Mhm.
That's why I said I kind of pulled back from the role of the writer and doing a lot of the interviews. I just kind of publish what everybody else does, or and push the content out on social and things like that. So I have a full-time government job. I have a salary, and as I said before, MMA news, at least, no matter who you write for, it's a job where one day you might not be making any money. I mean, like with this COVID,
Mhm.
luckily I'm working from home now, because of COVID, um, and where I do my regular job, the military installations kind of shut down temporarily. But um, with COVID, I there were no fights for weeks, for months. If I was only doing MMA news, my MMA news, if that was the only thing I did, I would have been out of business. I wouldn't have been able to pay any of the writers. So for me, I have benefits, I have health care. Um, my other job, my career is going to be my first. And I'm not saying that I put my MMA news second, but I don't I don't want to make it so that like that is my only income, my only source of income. I'm going to do my full career with the government. Use that for what I can, And My MMA News has always been just kind of like I said in the beginning, it was just something I started, and I didn't really expect it to grow to the point that it has. And right now, like if you look on, you can go search for all the different MMA sites, what their rankings are. We've always been in the last 2-3 years, we've always been in the top 10 to 15 sites. So for me to just start a site 6 years ago, have 30 writers, and be in the top 15 when there's MMA Fighting, MMA Junkie, BJ Penn, and all these other sites, that's good enough for me. I'll keep watching fights. I'll keep reporting on it. I'll keep bringing writers in, and we'll keep growing in that aspect. But I'm never going to make it so that it's, for me, the only thing that my only focus. I'm always going to have my other job just because my family's important to me. So it's a game that I've kind of like been able to balance. My love is in MMA. My heart is there. I love covering it. I love watching fights. I love talking to the fighters. I love writing about it. I love telling everybody's story, but it's never going to be like the only thing that I do. So for me, where we're at is I'm more than happy. We're going to continue to grow, but I'm never going to try to be like that guy, like I said, flying across the country or the world to cover an event when I can do it from home.
And I personally, I think I can speak for a lot of regional fighters where we don't necessarily want to see you go and do that. We always enjoy having Bob Maloney report for MyMMA News at regional shows, or have you or Adam or someone else come up. So for you to continue covering the regional circuit, I think it gives a lot of guys a voice, guys and girls a voice, and it lets them tell their story, like you said early on. So for you to keep covering regional MMA, we're thankful for that. And I appreciate, what you're doing for everybody that's, either making their amateur debut all the way up through, maybe, that last fight before the UFC, and then so on and so forth. So I think I can speak for most regional fighters that you've talked to, and thanking you for that and continuing to do that.
Awesome. Thank you. I love to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome, Eric. It was a pleasure today, getting to speak with you, sit down, talk a little bit about regional MMA and what's going on in the world. I'll be in touch. Got some fun things coming up in the future here for us. So, until next time, I'll talk to you soon.
All right, man. Take care. Thank you.
All right. You too. Thanks a lot.